Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all who are joining the Global Smart Cities Week hosted by the Smart Cities Council. Today's session is hosted by the SWAN Forum and we'll be discussing a deep dive into the smart water customer experience. Before we begin, I'll start with some introductions. My name is Sapir Yarden and I am the SWAN Forum Project Manager. I am joined today by global experts Pete Dakin from Word Nerds in the UK, Bobby Harris from Smart Water Smart City in the US, and Dr. Peter Prevost from Culloden Water in Australia. I'd like to share a little bit about what the SWAN Forum is. So SWAN stands for the Smart Water Networks. We are the leading global hub for the smart water and wastewater sectors. We're a UK-based nonprofit that brings together leading water utility solution providers, vendors, academics, investors, regulators, and other experts to talk about the acceleration and adoption of smart data-driven solutions in water and wastewater networks worldwide. To the left, you'll see the SWAN 5 layers, which are the industry standard for beginning your smart water journey. So this begs the question, why is smart water important to smart cities? Well, water utilities are at the forefront of consumer behavior, and cities have a direct impact on water consumption and efficiency. So given concerns related to water scarcity, reliability, and security, it's important to implement these digital solutions that can help improve operations and efficiency, and also help build the right organization and processes to support it. New water solutions offer ample opportunities to increase resilience and improve performance. So without further ado, I will let the speakers introduce themselves, starting with Pete Dakin.
Hi there. So my name is Pete Dakin. I am CEO of deep tech startup Word Nerds. We are a company that uses AI, some really new bleeding edge techniques of artificial intelligence and natural language processing, machine learning, with some really old techniques of corpus linguistics that's been floating around in dusty libraries for decades, centuries, and millennia. And the problem we solve is too many words. 80% of actionable data exists in the form of unstructured text. And language is pretty weird. Young people use it very differently to older people. There are huge regional variations within and between countries. And don't even start me on sarcasm, where loads of people literally write the opposite of what they mean and expect people just to understand, or spelling, punctuation, grammar, all those good things. Because it's so complex, we've never really had a decent software solution that will deal with this, and that's where Word Nerds jumps in. We've trained a computer to understand the context of language, understand the meaning behind language, which is super important because the context of language changes. Outstanding is always really, really positive, except in the case of outstanding debt. Water companies really want to hear from people who say that their water tastes like crap. For people who say that this crap tastes like water, that's almost certainly people experiencing American lager for the first time. Apologies to my US colleagues on the panel there. And so how do you kind of field all of those weird things about the way that language changes? And that's the problem that we've set out to do. By tackling this problem, we allow people to do two things. We allow them to understand in any data set, whether it's on social media or in customer complaints, on forums or in CRM systems. We allow them to understand the unknown unknowns. So just what are people talking about in this data set and how do they feel about it? What are the topics they care about? But also the known unknowns. If you've got a hypothesis or a question, if you think residents of a city might think this, but visitors think something different, how can you go to that data set and just find the people that are talking about this issue, irrespective of how they're expressing themselves, of the vocabulary that they use, because everybody expresses themselves differently, and understand that at scale. By doing that, we allow organizations, local authorities, water companies to take decisions based on data, objective decisions, better thought out, better strategic decisions, which allow them then in turn to save time, save costs, and build proper business cases for meaningful action.
Great, thank you so much, Pete. Bobby, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you very much. I appreciate being here. Smart Water Smart City was founded in 2014 after I spent about 15 years in data analytics and high-tech and moving into SCADA and advanced metering infrastructure and utility telecommunications infrastructure. And I realized through all of those years that when we started talking about smart cities and initiatives around smart cities, either at the federal level and a lot of the money that was going on for smart cities there, all the way down to at the local level, a lot of people misunderstood or were confused about what smart cities were, but notoriously they left smart water out of the conversation. And that bothered me on a lot of levels, but mainly because smart water infrastructure is absolutely critical to the growth of any city or community, a rural community. And I felt like I needed to focus my business on smart water, smart city, so that it was never left out of the conversation again. Today, I work with mayors, utility leaders, community leaders, technology providers around the world to help make marriages, if you will, of understanding, if nothing more, to make sure that those city leaders who have this wealth of challenges on their plate, water being one of them and wastewater, but to help them understand what are their options and how can they start initiatives with their communities, with technology providers, what technologies are available to them, and so that they can make long-term and very critical investments. So I enjoy focusing on that. I enjoy hearing about new technologies because there are some great ones around the world. And as long as smart water is still in the conversation, that will take us to a great place of growth. So again, my business, I started in 2014. I do a lot of marketing and messaging for cities as well. A lot of cities are trying to understand what initiatives under the smart city umbrella can they take advantage of? How do they become a smart city? And that's where I can come in and help them look at what are their most important challenges. Where can they put an initiative together that addresses all their consumers and their residents, and then take that forward in a smart city initiative. So it's an exciting time, and I appreciate the chance to be here with all of you.
Thank you for sharing. That's fascinating. We'll let Peter Prevost introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Sapi, and thanks for inviting me for this. So I'm Peter Prevost. I work for the water utility Colombo Water, which is a utility that serves a region of regional Victoria in the southern part of Australia. And so I'm a practitioner. I try to put into place all the great ideas that come from the industry. We, as a water utility, we have about 140,000 customers. So that's people within the region, but it's a fairly big region. It's 16,500 square kilometers. So that's, I'll just try to work that out. That's 6,500 square miles. And we have a fairly long water system because a lot of our towns are regional. So we have some very specific challenges there. My original occupation is civil engineering, and I'm still a civil engineer. But I sort of moved away from that, and I did my dissertation about customer service in the water industry, and I was really interested to see what customer centricity means, and developed some ideas on that. And through that, because I was analyzing a lot of data to work out my theories, I sort of rolled into data science. This new thing. One of my IT colleagues told me, you need to look at this new thing called data science. I think you find it interesting. And so that's how I rolled into this job. And it's a really exciting time. I'm sort of more or less doing the same thing I've been doing for 25 years, but there's all the technology developments are actually making it really exciting, and yeah, the powerful things we can do now. That's what excites me about smart water and being a part of SWAN.
Thank you so much for sharing, and I'm looking forward to a really engaging conversation. So let's get started. The first question is for Bobby. What do you view as the relationship between water utilities and the city? And do you feel that customers view this differently from the utility itself?
That's a great question. And again, it kind of really speaks to my business in general. There is a very small relationship in some cases, some not a relationship at all, what you would truly call a relationship. I talk to mayors and city leaders a lot, and the war stories that you hear about lack of funding, aged infrastructure, challenges with their tax base, how are they going to attract new businesses? All of that falls back on a water infrastructure topic. So the relationship should be, needs to be, one of hand in hand to solve the problem. The municipal leaders need to have a strong water infrastructure and wastewater infrastructure if they intend to hold on to their tax base, if they intend to attract new manufacturing and large business, because those are heavy users of water as well. You get into water quality issues. We've seen some challenges in the US around that with the aging infrastructure, but also with some bad actors that want to perhaps challenge water purity. So mayors have all of this on them. Sometimes they don't quite know where to turn. When you think about non-revenue water affecting a mayor, and what they can and can't do from a financing perspective, you need to get very creative with some public-private partnerships and some individual money perhaps from some federal places. But the relationship really needs to stay more, like I said, hand in hand. The mayors need the water utilities to tell them what are the technologies that are latest and greatest. It can't be just about a new reservoir or a new water tank. Yes, those are part of the solution, but when you're thinking about aging infrastructure and water quality and pressure monitoring and getting paid for every drop on those smart meters, that kind of infrastructure discussion needs to continue to happen on an ongoing basis. Whether or not the consumers see this relationship, normally not. I know of a few examples that come to mind where some very innovative water public works leaders and some very innovative mayors have come together, spent money wisely. Again, this is something as elected officials, mayors have to be sure they're spending money very wisely and for sustainable activities if they want to be reelected. Also for activities that support all of their residents, all of their constituents. So the examples where it works are where water utilities have come with the mayors. They've decided to put in new smart water infrastructure, smart meters, pressure monitoring, devices that can manage water quality, district monitoring, the whole digital infrastructure. And then they've also created these customer portals so that their consumers can get real-time data. All of that with the proper telecom overlay in order to bring all that great data back, all of that is critical for those success models. And those are the things that I like to hold on to. Those are the things that when consumers are brought into the mix, when they can actually see their usage, when they feel like they're partnering with their utility, when they feel like the money that's being spent by city council is for their greater good as well, that they'll actually see some benefit back from those tax dollars spent, that's when you really see this true smart city come together. So I think as the mayors desperately need the water utilities desperately need the mayors to understand it. You know, another real challenge that's coming that we don't think about a lot is the aging water worker, the population of employees at the water utility who have, some of them been there 30, 40, 50 years. They have that generational knowledge. They know some where every pipe was laid. When those guys are beginning to retire in the next now to 5 years, how are you going to replace those, especially when you're talking about real digital solutions? you've got to be able to attract the graduates and the kids, I would say, who have the ability to use Internet of Things devices, to expect apps and build portals. You've got to be able to attract those away from private sector. So if the cities and the utilities can come together along with some of their academic world and put some programs in place, the consumers would see this, the residents would see this as a path forward, a career forward that's cool. They can actually use high tech. And I think that's something we all need to be able to share, is that smart water is high tech. It's not your grandpa's water utility. And now's the time for these relationships to come together. And I think that's really the answer.
Thank you so much, Bobby. It sounds like there's a really big educational component, both from the utility to the city and from the rising young professionals into this smart city environment. Thank you so much. So this next question is for Peter Prevost. We often think of customer service as dealing with phone operators and long waits. I, in fact, was on the phone on hold yesterday for over an hour. So with so much data coming from consumers, the traditional means of addressing customer complaints or customer service is either obsolete or inefficient. What are some big data strategies or tools that could help manage this data?
Yeah, it's a great question that I think I need to unpack a little bit. And I'm probably going to answer it in a slightly unexpected way, that I believe that complaints are actually really an important part of what a water utility does. And often we actually don't get the complaints from customers who have a negative experience because the hurdles are too large to actually contact us. So let's say a customer has a negative experience. There are several things they can do. They can either just get over it, which happens, or get used to it. For example, some towns might have bad tasting water and people just get used to it and they don't even complain. We might have situations where they just complain to their neighbors, which is actually a negative. Both of these are a worse outcome for the utility, because what that means is that our corporate brand goes down and we suffer a reputation. And in the worst case, the customer might actually get so angry that they go to our regulators and complain to them, and then we have to explain to our regulators what's going on, which is a very costly and frustrating process. So a customer complaint is a gift to the business. So we need to let these complaints happen. To think that we can eliminate complaints, I think, is probably a pipe dream, because complaints are a little bit like radioactivity. There's always a background level. Too much of it is dangerous, it can kill you, but there's always a background level of radiation. And I think what I think is important is that, and Bobby mentioned earlier about apps and electronics, that we provide customers with a low threshold means to communicate to us. And rather than looking at them as complaints, I prefer to call them customer observations. Most of them are negative. Nobody ever rings us up and says, "I had a great shower this morning. Thank you very much, Colin Water." That doesn't happen. But I call them customer observations because these observations really help us to do our job better. Now, the other part of that is how do we reduce the number of complaints? How do we reduce the need for customers to complain to us? Well, often they do complain to us, and we do need to use complaints because we otherwise won't have any data. For example, the taste of water. That is something that there's not that many instruments that can actually work out the taste of water. So we rely on customers telling us. But one of the things that we implemented at Coleman Water is what I call the tap crawl. So instead of a pop crawl, we do a tap crawl. And what we do at Coleman Water is we get our samples from our different water systems. And we have 19 water treatment plants, and they're from different rivers and different groundwater sources, and different treatment processes. So they all taste slightly different. And we never realized how big those differences are until I asked some of my staff to drive around, get some samples, and then get all staff together, or a whole bunch of staff, and start tasting it. And in other words, bringing that customer experience into the office. And all of a sudden, that created quite an enlightening moment that, hey, is this what our customers are experiencing? We never realized that. The other part of reducing, so so first point is complaints are unavoidable and lower your threshold. The second part is put yourself in the shoes of the customers as much as you can, because often for us, especially engineers, the complaint, what's behind the complaint seems like a technical problem, but there's also psychology behind it. So put yourself in the shoes of customers. The other part, and that relates to smart technology, I was getting there eventually, is that smart technology can help us build networks where we know about problems before the customer might realize that there is a problem. I think that's very much, to a large degree, that's one of the great values of smart technology. So we have implemented digital metering technology, and we're rolling that out to all our customers. We're still in the process of doing this. We've done about half our region. And quite soon after we implemented this, we started detecting leaks on customers' properties. And we started to proactively actually tell these customers, hey, we think you have a leak. There's something weird in your consumption patterns. And so rather than the customer coming to us and complaining about a massively high $5,000 bill, we were able to work with them to help them fix that leak. So that's the third part of this, is that is to use technology to perhaps prevent complaints happening in the first place.
Thank you so much. I like the idea of changing the notion of a complaint to a gift. So now to hear from Pete Dakin, the CEO and founder of Word Nerds. Pete, you actually presented at the SWAN 10th Annual Conference that took place this summer. And during your panel, you presented the State of the Nation report on UK water companies and the customer experience that they have. So I'm wondering, what are some key highlights or concerns that you discovered through this report? And how is Word Nerds able to measure customer sentiment?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. I think it builds really nicely on some of the points that Bobby and Peter have made already, because I think actually having a look at how some of these indicators are being used, to Peter's point that he's just raised, I completely agree that I think for too long, utilities companies generally and a lot of brands have seen complaints as an issue that just is a PR issue that has to be killed as quickly as possible. And they spend lots of money on frontline staff dealing with the problem, but much less money on sitting behind the scenes, looking at what the problems are, why they happen in the first place, and what they can do to preempt them. And I think the interesting thing about our State of the Nation report at the SWAN conference was the timing of it. 2020, in case anybody hasn't noticed, has been a pretty bizarre year. And there are all kinds of local differences. I understand that the situation in Australia must be completely different to the situation in the UK. But to give you an example of what's happened in the UK, we started the year with a nice big storm, Storm Dennis. Water companies always love storms because they're not busy enough most of the time. So that firstly kicked us off to a great start. And then, of course, COVID hit. And we had the immediate backlash of COVID, where everybody went straight to the shops and bought a bit extra loo roll and, all the pasta and all that kind of thing. And the shelves were bare. And the knock-on effect of for the water industry there was people started flushing different things down the toilet because they had no loo roll. They were putting wet wipes down and sewers became blocked. And we were picking this up in the data. We were picking this up in the social data. And what one water company in the UK actually started using people tweeting about loo roll shortages in supermarkets as a prompt for them to increase their campaign spend on talking about what people should flush down the loo as a preemptive measure to stopping sewers being blocked, which was kind of really interesting and novel approach to something that's, to our knowledge, never been done before. The next thing that happened was the whole kind of hygiene anxiety that surrounded COVID. So the UK government put out lots of information about how often we needed to wash our hands, singing happy birthday twice and all that kind of stuff. So immediately water consumption went up. People weren't at work anymore. They were staying at home. They were using more water. That meant the combination of not being at work, either being on furlough or people being laid off, and being at home, meant that there was financial pressure on people. People were having different types of bills to pay, and there was a lot of stress and anxiety about paying bills, which, and as a major spend for a lot of people, water companies weren't spared the backlash of that. And then when furlough really kicked in and more people spent longer at home, everybody invented all these hobbies that we'd never had before. I mean, I don't know what it's like elsewhere in the world, but the gardens here in the UK have never been better. Everybody's garden is absolutely gorgeous. Obviously, people have been watering their lawns and putting a load of drinking water down the back into the water table directly, which, you know, isn't helpful, but is understandable. Patios have been power washed to the nth degree. You can eat your dinner off some people's front driveways in this country at the moment. It's amazing. But all of that is increased consumption for water, and it's all stuff that put extra pressure on the system that water companies needed and wanted to know about. And then the kicker, right in the middle of that, we had the driest ever May on record. Everybody immediately starts talking about hosepipe bans, paddling pools being banned, hot tub sales were going through the roof, 1,000% increase in hot tub sales in the UK. And you have basically had this perfect storm of consumption being bigger than ever before at the same time as the pressure on the supply being as acute as anybody can ever remember. And here in the UK, we have an additional problem, which is that it rains all the time. And people see water coming out of the sky for free every day. And we just think there's loads of water. We live in a really wet country. And just because it's free falling out of the sky does not mean it's free coming out of your tap. And it also doesn't mean that we understand the embedded water in everything else. So, you know, I mentioned beer before. It takes 150 liters of water, I have learned, to make 1 pint of beer. I mean, it's an acceptable price to pay for beer, don't get me wrong. But it's an incredible amount of water that you need. And so basically, in amongst all of this maelstrom of supply versus demand, we were able to listen to what consumers up and down the country were saying, to plot the problems that different water companies were having. Because was it a problem that every single water company has, that, you know, it's just something that is a function of what's going on, it's a standard problem, or is it a problem that is unusually prevalent in their data compared to other people's data? Because if it's that kind of a problem, then it's usually something that they can solve fairly easily. And we were able to rank everybody by, firstly, the topics, the problems the customers were having, occasionally the praise as well. My shower this morning was outstanding, Peter. I know you're not directly responsible, but somebody closer to me was. And we were able to say, you know, the good things and the bad things for each different water company, and rank them in terms of performance. And it's a starting point. And, you know, these are all lagging indicators. We're looking backwards at something that's happened over a period of time, to Peter's point. But having that kind of information in real time lets you use these things as leading indicators. And bringing it back to the smart cities agenda, we're doing a lot of work with local councils around all kinds of issues that are broader than just the water industry. So, you know, issues where people are saying that they're getting no mobile signal, or difficulties connecting to the mobile network, while the providers are actually saying that there's no issues with it. And again, looking at supply and demand of loads of different things in real time so that action can be taken about it.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm wondering if you can touch on a few of the sources that you use to understand these sentiments.
Sure, yeah. So one of the interesting things about the whole kind of revolution in feedback is the internet has completely democratized the feedback process. 10 years ago, if you wanted to get your voice heard about an issue, you had to sit on the phone for 20 minutes to a water company or write a letter in. Nowadays, people just go online, and there are all kinds of open data sources like Twitter, like Reddit, like online forums, where people will just go on and talk about the companies and not to the companies. And it's been a subtle but distinct change in what consumers expect companies to do. Consumers now expect companies to read these conversations going on and react, and it's not their responsibility to have to even bother to tell these water companies. So a lot of our data sources are ambient online sources, whether that's blogs, comments, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, A lot of people run Facebook groups, and we can, with their permission, we can listen to some of those. So there's a bunch of different kind of online sources. Additional to that, customer complaints are an amazing source of rich, actionable information to us, and we can plug into CRM systems, customer management systems. We can pull in web chats. We can pull in all kinds of information about engineers' reports when they go out to fix a problem, when there's an issue with an asset. A lot of the time, there's a little free text box to say what the problem was and how they solved it, and whether it's recurring, and the quality of the data that's gone into those SAP systems and ERP systems has historically not been good, because quite rightly, most engineers realize that nobody ever reads them, because reading all that text is a massive process. But at the point people understand that there's an automated process for fielding, processing, and reflecting back the learning in that process, the quality of the input goes up, because people actually think what they write can make a difference. And most people in most jobs, most of the time, want to do a great job and want their activities to build on something positive and affect change.
So true voice of customer. So this question touches upon that. A lot of times active users are those who dominate the discourse. So unless someone had a very positive or negative experience, it doesn't really come across. So how can utilities use this information to help prevent biases in customer service? And this is open to the floor.
Yeah, it's a great question, because even the ambient feedback that Pete mentioned is in a way biased, because it's only people who feel strong enough one way or the other who are going to complain about or describe their experience with water utility, their observations. And this is something we struggle with when we try to get feedback for, say, our pricing submission. To how do we motivate people who are perhaps not really motivated to tell us what they think about a water utility? But then that's what you usually find, is that those people are fairly ambivalent about water in the first place. And I guess the academic answer is that you need to find a good sample of the population. What we try to do is we just pay panels, but then is that biased as well when you pay somebody for a survey? Perhaps Pete, this is more your area. So how do you get an unbiased view of a service?
Yeah, it's a really hard one, and I think it's compounded by the fact that water and utilities actually face an issue that people expect water. Water is seen almost as a right, not something to be consumed, because historically most people have had it for free. They've been able to turn on the tap and get massively high quality water all the time. And the specific challenge water companies have is most of the time they're only communicating with you at points of stress. So if I never hear from my water company at all, and I never see their vans, and the only time I have any interaction with them is when they take my direct debit out of my bank account, I am perfectly happy. I don't need them to talk to me. I don't want them to see me. I am too busy doing all of the dull things in my life. When I have to speak to them, it's normally because there's a problem. And how do you build a brand in an environment where you're only talking to people when there are problems, and when their only motivation for communicating, as Peter's already said, nobody wants to get online and go, hey, that's another delicious glass of water, Northumbrian water. Thank you so much indeed for that. It's just not going to happen. And I think the answer is around, accepting that there are biases in everything, understanding those biases, but trying to use this data to quantify where the pain points are. So, for example, is this an issue that is a one-off issue that is just unavoidable and it's happened and people are going to be upset about it and you can move on and learn from it? Is it a small issue that affects everyone, but it doesn't affect them massively, or it's not actually going to, it's not actually kind of life-threatening or a huge problem? Or is it a really narrow issue that only affects a small number of users, but of those that it uses, or for a particular type of user, it affects them so profoundly that they can't use your service, or they are more vulnerable, or they're already a vulnerable person for whom this compounds another issue? And I think those are the areas where water companies and smart cities can use data to better target responses, better prioritize where budgets are spent and where effort is expended. because that's what this usually comes down to. I think historically, people have fixed the biggest technical problem first, or the thing that has generated the most volume of complaints, whereas understanding sentiment, understanding volume, understanding the nuance behind what's going on allows you to take a broader view on where your energy should be expended first. And that's key to customer-centric customer services and really listening to your users and delivering them a service that is excellent and targeted and dynamic and smart.
Thank you. Bobby, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I was listening and I agree with Pete and Peter on a lot of those comments. One thing that I've seen, though, is when your water utility only communicates a little bit with the consumers, this bit of fear comes out that all of a sudden now they're going to put in smart meters, so therefore my water bill is going to go up. Or, oh my gosh, they're monitoring every time I flush the toilet. They must know that I'm home. This is Big Brother looking over my shoulder. So that kind of fear can take over if you're not proactive and over communicate with your residents. And while I think a lot of the digital communication is spot on, I think that has to be pervasive. There's a certain population, when I think about customer bias, there's a certain population of residents who are not on Twitter, who are not on Facebook, who just now are really doing email, but not very much, who are not going to use a customer portal. They want to have a town hall, or they want to have a mailer, or they want a door hanger to come along and say, hey, we're your water utility, and here's some things that we want you to know to not flush, and we want you to know we're putting in new smart meters so that we can measure every drop of water, but what does this mean for you? That over communication, I have seen many times work very well for utilities and for cities who needed to put in infrastructure upgrades, and they were getting a lot of pushback from their consumers. So being able to take the information from all of those areas and make sure that customer service improves. And as long as you're communicating that we're doing all this in order to better serve you, to bring better service, to bring higher quality water, to make sure that you're heard even if you don't think you are. To me, those are the ones that are the most successful, and that takes a lot more than what most water utilities were ever used to do. Normally, they mailed you a bill once a month, maybe once a quarter. They direct debit your account. You never talk to them, as Pete said. For me, I don't really want to talk to them either. I live in this world, though. There's so many other residents who would appreciate understanding that. So I think we need to make sure that we take that extra step when we really talk about smart cities, and make sure that we over communicate, at least when we're doing big infrastructure challenges, big upgrades, things that people will notice.
Thank you so much for sharing. So going back to a point that Pete made earlier about the shift in water consumption, in cities in particular, we're moving from the more commercial water usage to residential because more people are at home, spending more time there, and maybe spending more, using more water. So this can increase residential water bills. And I have a few questions for the entire group. What roles do utilities play in informing customers about their usage and efficiency? And Bobby, this education component seems very strong in you, so I'll let you start off.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Thank you. Being able to tell a consumer if they've got a leak before they get a very large water bill, to me, that's great customer service. That's also putting some power back into the consumer's hands. If I know what I'm using, maybe I'm not going to fill up the swimming pool or the hot tub. Maybe I'm going to wait and do laundry at a different hour in order to use water at different times. We've seen it on the electric side, this time of day usage and rates that go along with that. Will we get to that on a water percentage? Maybe not at the residential, but certainly at commercial and industrial areas. And you're right, we've seen this shift with more people being at home, more workers being at home. So the usage going up there, the usage going down in office buildings. But, you know, I think it's interesting to see how there will be another shift when we start thinking of the manufacturing opening back up and some of these large users of water coming back. I think that efficiency for residential or commercial and industrial, to me, is really important. And utilities have to be proactive to that. They've got the tools. If they don't have the tools, the people on this call know where to tell them to get the tools. The tools exist. The data analytics is there. There's really no excuse for not using it, frankly. So there's Bobby's little view of the world.
Thanks. Peter, as someone who works at a utility, can you share your insights on this?
Yeah, excuse me. I found Pete's story quite interesting about the enormous increase in water consumption. See, in the whole COVID crisis so far has played itself in Australian winter, so water consumption is very low. People stay indoors, especially here in Victoria. It gets fairly chilly. We have issues sometimes with frozen water meters. People don't realize that Australia can get this cold. So we haven't seen that massive increase in water consumption. But what we have seen is that there are a lot more people now asking for payment arrangements. There's quite a steady increase. The government is still sort of propping up the economy with free money. But as soon as that finishes, we're already flagging that it's going to be quite a big issue for us when people are no longer able to pay their bills. That's something that we're starting to see. Water consumption has definitely changed, but more in the way that it's every day is a weekend. Because people are waking up later, they don't have to drive to work. They just, you know, I'm in my office now, but I'm at home, so I don't have any commute. I wake up, I go to my office, and that water consumption is shifting, but it's actually good, in a way that's actually good for our systems because the water consumption is not spread over a larger area rather than at one location. So the network pressures are fine. It will be really interesting to see how this summer plays out, but at the moment it's raining quite a bit here. We have a La Nina, which means we'll probably get a wet summer. So we might possibly get away with not having the issues that Pete described. But about the role of informing customers about their consumption, sorry, I got a bit off topic perhaps. I think it's really important to tell people about their consumption, but I don't think that we should give them just graphs and raw data. Because a lot of water engineers struggle interpreting exactly what that means. So what about our customers who are not really water experts? We don't have an app yet for our customers, but we are working on it. And I'm toying with some ideas rather than, we will give them raw data if they want to, but I think it's more important to give them proactive messaging, like what I mentioned about the leak detection. We like to automate that at some stage. But also, for example, wouldn't it be nice if we could send a message to all our customers, and through the water consumption, we probably will know who are avid gardeners and who are not, because we can see that in the data, and we can send them a message, say, hey, dear customer, tomorrow's going to be a 45-degree day or 100-degree day for you Americans. Please water your garden today instead of tomorrow, so you don't waste all your water on evaporation. Those sort of proactive messaging, that's, I think, where this technology can really help. I've heard examples in the Netherlands where they use gamification to compare customers' water consumption amongst each other. I think Vitens in the Netherlands, that they developed a game where kids in the house were actually competing with each other about the lowest water consumption. And you can do that. And behind that is all the hardcore technology, but I think we need to think of different ways to communicate water consumption to customer on top of the raw data and the naked information.
Thank you. Pete, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think Bobby and Peter are exactly right. This is about transparency. Water companies are historically really good at talking to each other. You get a bunch of engineers in a room, and I've seen it happen. It's an incredible sight. And they will talk about all kinds of technical details, the like of which you and I have no interest whatsoever in, but it's brilliant. They're less good at talking to their customers. We just completed a design sprint at Northumbrian Water's Innovation Festival up here in the northeast of England. It's a wonderful event. They invite competitors, comparators, industry experts, complete idiots who know nothing about water, customers. They put them all in a room and they say, right, here are our biggest 30 problems. Do a design sprint, tell us the solutions to these problems. And half of the time, it's the people that have no understanding of the water industry whatsoever that come up with the biggest problem. We did one on water use, water efficiency, demand, and the winning idea that got voted on that came out was something to go at the end of the weather forecast. And at the end of every weather forecast, we tell everybody it's going to be hot. We tell everybody the pollen count's going to be up, and if you've got hay fever, you know, all this kind of stuff. But we never say to anybody, hey, by the way, the reservoir's at this level. The rivers are at that level. There is going to, if we know the weather's going to be really hot for the next 12 days, and we know that reservoir levels are really low. In 7 days' time, with current demand, we're going to go into a situation of where we've got problems. So we only ever communicate when there's a problem. And if it becomes part of everyday discourse, if we just, as a matter of course, gave it an easy number for everybody to understand, number out of 10, today demand is at 5, reservoir levels are at 8, fill your boots, go and have a water fight. Water those daffodils in the back garden, you know, get the paddling pool out, you do whatever you want to do. It's not a problem today. But actually tomorrow, you know, building on, you know, exactly what Peter was saying there, that would be absolutely massive. And it's just about transparency and just about changing the culture of when you communicate and how.
Great. Peter, you slightly touched on the second question about accommodating changes in consumer behavior to new business models for utilities. And it seems like the answer is yes. So I would like it, for the sake of time, to jump to the third question about businesses as water customers and what happens to those who have offices in cities. What might be the implications of the shift from the reduction in commercial or industrial usage of water?
Yeah, interesting that you asked me that question, because I'm from regional Australia, and yeah, cities are not really a thing here. So that's probably more a question for my colleagues in Melbourne. But based on what I know, all the networks are obviously designed to serve a certain demand, and if that doesn't eventuate, and this is not only water, this is a bigger city problem: traffic, public transport. Everything is geared towards, we've got to move all these people into the center of the city. Especially a place like Melbourne, where I wouldn't hate to live in Melbourne because the commuting is a nightmare there. But post-COVID, we are already talking about, within my organization, what does the post-COVID world look like? And I said to my organization, I'm more than happy to spend 3-4 days a week at home. So this whole idea of commuting and everything is going to be different. And as this is a conference not just about water, but about cities, I think this is a general problem that everybody's going to have to deal with. And I compare this situation, the COVID situation, with the millennium drought that we went through here in Australia, where things were really, really dire. Like the city of Bendigo, 100,000 people, was about to run out of water. But that was massive. We spent lots of money to fix all that. As Pete said, we engineers love to get together and solve problems. But what has happened is it changed the mindset of how people think about water. And perhaps the COVID situation will change the way how we think about what a city actually means. What do we all have to go into the center of the city to do our thing? And perhaps not, because we're proving now that doesn't have to be the case, which means water networks have to change, probably everything has to change.
Bobby, do you have any comments about the shift?
Yeah, I think the shift, again, I think we're going to see it shift back. Certainly in the United States, we saw the shift like everyone else. But I think you're beginning to see some things shift back a little bit. But to Peter's point, I don't know that we'll ever see people massively going back into offices. I think that could be a challenge. But the other side of that becomes, you've got all this infrastructure built. You've got these massive buildings that used to house, 1,000 people or 2,000 people. What are you going to do with that now? So that's a bigger infrastructure question. Certainly it's something that we're going to need to solve with our cities and our community leaders and our utilities going forward.
Absolutely. So I'd like to move on to the next question about how utilities can transform to better understand their customers and optimize their customer engagement.
Oh, really, I'll just say quickly, I think we've talked on a few of the topics here, but honestly, any kind of smart devices, you're going to have that telecom infrastructure in order to bring all that data back, in order to fill all of the applications and the data analytics plays that go on. I think around the world, utilities need to look at partnering from telecommunications infrastructure perspectives and how much bandwidth is needed to bring the right data back at the right time. And then how do you use that on the backside of a water utility? Just giving a water utility customer service rep or workforce guy all of the data may or may not be of any value to them. You need to present it in a way that helps them solve their problems. So again, it goes back to listening to the utility business challenges. And I'll let Pete and Peter have a go at it.
So the voice of the customer is an interesting concept, and I love what Peter's doing with actually literally putting your ear on the community in a way that was never possible, say, 10 years ago. There's also a non-technology aspect to that, and it's called internal marketing. So that's using marketing techniques to make your staff more aware of how customers feel and putting them in their shoes. And I mentioned previously that we started this internal water tasting, which gives us data, and data is great, and I can produce graphs and everybody can salivate over those graphs. But what the real impact is that we as an organization started to have an appreciation of the customer experience. And another great example where I made a big fist pump is in a meeting. Often we talk in meetings, as Pete said, about engineering stuff, and we go over all the numbers, and they're very abstract things. And we were discussing a pressure issue in one of our towns. And then one of the new managers said, so does this mean that Grandma Mabel can't switch on her evaporative air cooler on a 40-degree day? And we're like, yeah, that's what that means. So all of a sudden, this technology issue became an experience for a customer. So putting yourself in the shoes of a customer. There's lots of techniques to do that. I like the idea of customer personas and say, well, I've got this capital investment here, but what does it actually mean to this person called Mabel, and she's a pensioner, she lives by herself, hasn't got a lot of money. Those sort of conversations, I think the non-technology solution and putting that into the utility employees' minds is probably as important as anything else.
And from my perspective, I think, Bobby and Peter have said it. Data for data's sake is meaningless. It's useless. We've got data coming out of our eyeballs in a lot of cases, and most organizations we deal with struggle to get the value out of the data they already have, never mind more data sources like unstructured text. And the interesting thing for me about this is, particularly in the UK, where a lot of the infrastructure was designed and built in Victorian times. And if you think about that logically, what do we use in everyday life that was designed and built in Victorian times? Nobody goes to work on a penny farthing. Nobody uses yogurt pots and strings instead of smartphones. This just it's not gonna happen. So why do we do that with water? And the water industry is so rife for disruption. It is, if we could sit down now with a blank sheet of paper and design water afresh, we wouldn't be flushing drinking water down the toilet, literally flushing our product down the loo. And at some stage, water companies, other third parties will disrupt this industry. And the people that will disrupt it are the people that are best able to listen to the problems that the customers are having and act in a way that best answers those. And that requires a tiny but important element between the data and the action, and that's a human being. And all of these technologies are only as good as the humans that use them and make the decisions, and then the quality of the follow-up for those decisions. And I think that is where we're seeing huge progress in water companies across the globe. I think there's a real willingness for water and utilities companies to make these changes. There's more and better data coming in all the time. And the next challenge is dealing with that data efficiently, effectively, to disrupt what we've done before and make a better fist of it moving forwards.
Thank you so much for your insights and comments. We'll move on to the next section, which will be rapid fire questions. So let's get started. Machine learning is imperative to understanding customer experience. Pete, I'd love to hear if you agree or disagree.
Well, I'm going to sit in the middle a bit. Yes, my job title is data science, and I love machine learning, but a lot of business problems can be solved without it. So yes, machine learning is great, and especially when you have these massive data sets that Pete is mining. Machine learning is the only way to make sense out of those. But the data sets that we internally have are actually not that complex and not that fascinating. Perhaps that is our own mistake, because we don't really ask customers anything about their own lives. So yes and no. It depends on what you want to do.
Awesome. Pete, you also wanted to share something?
Yeah, there's, we are subject to fads. 5 years ago, I don't know, it doesn't matter what the problem was, the answer is blockchain. A couple of years before that, doesn't matter what the problem was, the answer was augmented reality. And certainly at the minute, it's the turn of AI, machine learning. AI, deep learning, neural networks, NLP, machine learning, all of these things are fantastic tools in your belt, but they are just that, they're tools. And they are part of a wider toolkit that has some very new stuff in and some very old stuff. Spreadsheets are brilliant. You can solve most problems with a spreadsheet.
Thank you for sharing. The next question, is smart water acceleration hindered more by available solutions or company culture? And Bobby, I'll let you take a stab at this one.
I'm a believer that it's absolutely company culture, city culture. I think as we've seen and as we have seen at Swan, definitely, there is smart water technology solutions that will just amaze you around the world. It's really the company culture. It's the aging culture. It's also the not wanting to spend the money or start a new project. So I think it's completely culture.
Awesome. And the last rapid fire question, who is more invisible, the water company to the user or the customer to the water company? And just a point here that water company and water utility are being used interchangeably.
I'm going to jump in first, and apologies if you can hear my dog. My dog is not invisible to this call, unfortunately. And the answer to this question, and I think it's a genius question, for me, it's definitely the water company is much less visible to the user than the user is to the water company, and that has to change, and I think it is changing.
Great, thank you so much. So I'd like to close with a statement from a Swan utility member who said, we need to move from thinking of our customer utility relationship as being a bill that a customer receives. It's the utility's job to create a business model where customers are paying an investment to a highly valued service. It should be about providing value and not recovering cost. And I think that the speakers today have shared how this is very true. I'd be happy to hear some closing thoughts from each of you. Pete, take it away.
I think what we all generally agreed on, sorry,
Go ahead.
is that technology is fantastic and is definitely a necessary condition for water utilities to be able to move forward. But it's not a sufficient condition by itself. Bobby spoke about aging workforce and having the ability to actually do the people with the technology. And Pete, you wonderfully said the human between the technology and the action. I love that phrase. I'm going to use that, because having technology is one thing and knowing something is one thing, but knowing is not the same as doing.
I completely agree, Peter. And, my closing thought, actually, Peter summed it up beautifully. It really is the human element. All business is still personal, and nowhere is it more personal than when you talk about water infrastructure.
Yeah, I think, we are facing as an industry and as a civilization, we are facing unprecedented problems, but at the same time, we've got unprecedented opportunity. And what I'm seeing as a complete outsider to the industry, by the way, is I'm seeing consumers who want to do something about it. They really want to change their behavior. They really want to understand what the problems are. Never before have we seen the environmentalism movement so prevalent. Never before have we seen consumers so educated in the wider problems that face them and wanting to do more about it. And at the same time, the industry, the companies, the experts, they've got access to technology, the like of which they've never had before. ways of organizing themselves and ways of acting that they've never been able to do. And I think we're going to see some real kind of traction in the next few years. It's going to be a really exciting space. And all of these things are going to come together, and we're going to get much better, much quicker. And hopefully we can solve these problems in time before they become too profound.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for sharing your insights and for your participation on today's call, a deep dive into the Smart Water customer experience. For those interested in getting in touch, this is our contact information, and we hope to hear from you soon.